So as we move ahead, now we're going to start getting into some details here. And I would like to start with some trends and terminology. Let's baseline this. Is this every possible term that you will hear? Of course not. There's a lot of other things, but this is not meant to be a presentation or, over a series of weeks. It's meant to be a one-off, right? So here's some terminology, some trends and related terminology. First, in no set order, is the Great Reflection. That term sort of arose a little bit after the Great Resignation became more commonplace in our news and other such sources. What it basically indicated is that not only were people resigning in much larger percentages and numbers than they had before the COVID era, but they were reflecting upon what was most important to them. So if they were doing X career or X job in X industry, is that really, when you reflect, what they really want to be doing with their life? Because you only have one life, you only live it once, time is an irreplaceable asset, so let's reflect. So I have heard and read many stories talking about how some people cashed out, took a buyout, and they went off and they took some time off and they traveled, or they bought a franchise and went into entrepreneurship, or they started volunteering more. They were reflecting on where they were at that moment in time. Next is the term hybrid. That term has arisen a lot because workplaces are no longer static. Now, our friends in commercial realty would love that if every building that they built in the 1970s and 80s and such would still be used at high occupancy rates. But I'm sorry to say that the world does not stand still. So hybrid workplaces or arrangements has increased noticeably over the past several years. So if you are in a position where you are working for someone else, or maybe you happen to be someone who is an employer of other people, I would strongly encourage you to be very aware of what a hybrid workplace is and why you should seriously look at either enabling it or wondering why, asking good quality questions. Why don't I have this option? Okay. Great reshuffle. Another term that arose after the Great Resignation was sort of the first stake in the ground. The reshuffle said we are reshuffling industries and professions, and we are now starting to land on things that may have been very different than what we were considering for our career trajectory beforehand. Because you might have seen these pictures online. Maybe you're like me. I've had multiple mentors in my life, and several of them have shared this information with me. And if you look at the average career, it is a squiggly line. It's very rarely a straight one or linear. So the reshuffle says we are going to reshuffle things almost as if like a James Bond thing, shaken and not stirred. The big quit. Related to the Great Resignation, it's a big trend. We're going to quit because guess what? My workplace, my employer, my industry was not adjusting to the realities that I had to face as a mom, as a dad, as a caregiver for older generations. Maybe, in many parts of the world and, here in America, let alone, in certain regions of America, certain states and localities were on different paces when it came to the reopening or the renormalization of society coming out of this era. So some people said, and I know this is a tired phrase, but take this job and shove it, and they quit. So the big quit was the fact that this was a big trend. Upskilling and reskilling, I already sort of mentioned that before, but let's briefly dive in a little more. Reskilling says that we are literally going to be a little bit more of a deep-seated change. Maybe you were in the insurance industry or banking or something, and you are now going into something more creative, or what some would call right-brained careers, as opposed to left brain, which are more analytical. You're probably going to have to reskill, because the skill set is a whole lot different if you are pursuing something that's more creative. Okay, maybe you moved into marketing or public relations. These are a different skill set, and you are going to have to, in many respects, folks, wipe the slate clean and do what Alvin Toffler advised us way back in the 80s, which is basically unlearn and relearn things. And that is somewhat wrenching for people, but it's very, very important. Upskilling is a little different. Upskilling says that I may already have a skill, but I need to renew my understanding of it. Maybe it's because of technology. Maybe it's because of simple time seepage, or time has passed by. So you are going to upskill yourself and get up maybe to a different plane. I'll give you an example from my own life. My mother went back into the workforce. Now, this is way before this stuff happened, but it just still applies. And she had to upskill because she already had nursing credentials, but she had been out of the workforce for a while, and things had changed noticeably in nursing. So she had to upskill and go back and take a bunch of classes. And then she had to renew her nursing credentials. So that would be an example of upskilling, because she was in the same space, but time seepage and technology had changed. Quiet quitting. That one is a little newer. Quiet quitting has some different definitions, but the one definition I'll latch on for this, folks, is that rather than working super duper hard and not getting ahead in your chosen career, your job, your position, you do just what is expected of you, which frankly, depending on your perspective, and this is an open conversation, that might be perfectly sufficient, right? I mean, it's not like you're shirking or slacking. It just means that instead of working extra for, like for example, maybe you are paid on a salary, and the vast majority of salaries are considered a 40-hour-a-week position, right? Well, there's this thing that's happened over the years, and this is where some people may say, I want to quit, where there's an expectation from employers that you're going to work 50 hours, but you're still going to be paid for the equivalent of 40. Well, quiet quitting says, I'm going to work 40 hours and I'm done. So you can come to your own reasonable conclusion, but I think that's a trend that has some legs. And then lastly, RTO, which is return to office. That is a trend that is pushing a ton of people into the resignation, quitting, reshuffling, reflection worlds. Because people are saying, well, wait a minute, for several years, I was able to do this position from a remote place, or maybe even in a hybrid setting. And now you're telling me that I have to come back? Why? And most places cannot really give you a reason. It's just like, well, we expect you to do this. Well, that doesn't work anymore. This is your golden chance, folks, to ask big questions and say why. And if the employer has any understanding or values you, they will not attempt to deflect it or give you a bunch of terminology that doesn't make sense. They'll just come out and straight out say, well, it's because we have office space that we have to use, or something like that. And if they would tell you the truth, then maybe you stick around. But if they give you a bunch of diversionary stuff, like, well, teamwork happens better in an office, you probably should be questioning that. So those are some trends in terminology that are happening as we speak.